Welcome back to Communicology. Today I'd like to talk to you about something that is tied into a conversation we had before when we were talking about the idea of what rhetoric is, and that's digging a little bit deeper into the concept of persuasion and why persuasion matters. Now, in the video on rhetoric, I talked about the idea of how people are always trying to find ways to persuade you and how you should be on the lookout. And once you understand how rhetoric works and what rhetoric really is, you can start seeing people persuading you a lot more often, and it comes out in different forms. And a lot of what we tend to see when we think of persuasion is advertising. And we're totally surrounded by advertising and the money that's tied up in it, and we just sometimes don't think too deeply about it. But why should we care? Well, a fool and his money are soon parted, as the proverb goes. But the truth of it is someone's always trying to get us to buy something. Sometimes we're willing to be, sold. We want to be sold. Sell me on why your product is the best. And it's not a big deal. Sometimes we're minding our own business and whammo, an advertisement comes our way and we start thinking about that product and how we want it. Well, the truth of it is advertising's here to stay. It's been around for millennia. It's not something that's a new thing thought up by folks on Wall Street and ways to get us to buy new trinkets and things. It's been around for millennia because people have been trying to sell their wares for a very, very long time. Now, when it comes to persuasion in general, what is persuasion? Well, think of persuasion basically as convincing an audience of a stated opinion or belief. And the idea of that is, well, how do I convince them? What do I have to do to get them to do that? And what is the opinion or belief? Well, the opinion or belief is that my product is the best thing for you, or my product is the best thing for this moment in time, or my product would best suit your given situation, whatever the situation might be. So that is the attempt of the ad person trying to get you to buy their product. They're trying to persuade you. Now, it's true that there are some advertisements that are based in informative pitches. They might want to tell you about this new product that's out there. Typically, there's still what's important in persuasion is that call to action. So they might tell you about the new product, but they obviously want you to buy it too. So they might call you to buy it. But the idea of persuasion in advertising is mostly just because they want people to buy the thing. So again, maybe you've never thought too deeply about how much we're persuaded. Well, let's look about why persuasion matters, especially when it comes to advertising. Now, the biggest thing is exposure. And we don't think too deeply about it until you start thinking of the numbers. Now, the average United States adult, spends 7 hours looking at screens every day. 7. Almost a third of your life is spent looking into a screen. So if you live to be 90, 30 years of your life was spent looking at a screen. That's daunting. And now you might think, well, I'm not in my phone that much. Well, when we say screen, we mean anything. So it could be a computer, it could be a television, it could be a tablet, it could be your phone. But anytime you're looking at a screen, playing video games, that's all screen time. So 7 hours on average, which means if there's someone out there who's disciplined and only spends 20 minutes a day in front of the screen, there's somebody out there who's probably cranking out 14 hours. So that's amazing to think about, that much time. Now, for those people who work at, work in like desk jobs for a living, can understand that. There's lots of times you'll spend 8 hours, 9 hours a day sitting in front of a monitor doing work. That's not uncommon. I know when I was in the business world as a professional writer, 8, 9, 10 hours a day in front of a monitor. And that's what you do. You might have to consult books to do something, or you might have meetings to go to, but at the end of the day, the bulk of the work was sitting in front of a computer and just working, staring at it. So that's one of those things that, you can see how that number can be very high. But because you also see how much time we spend on our phones now, you can also understand why that number is so incredibly high. And it's almost depressing to think about that, again, a third of your life just about, on average, spend in front of a screen. But It's not that you're just sitting there and the screen just happens to be floating in front of you. You're engaging with it, and the people who are programming the screen are engaging you. So you'll get everything from pop-up ads and other little things that come along that find their way in front of your face. Now, when you think that number about 7 hours is high, think about just briefly how many ads that you think you see every day. Have a number in your head? Some studies, and this is disputed because it's a big wide range and there's no good way to track it, but some studies calculate the amount of ads that you see each day between 4 and 10,000 per day. I mean, that's a staggering number. Now, keep in mind, this is partly tied in with the screen issue because you'll have things like, obviously, pop-up ads that come along, but you're also going to see things like, as you're driving down the road, billboards that drive by. You'll walk down the street and there'll be, in the storefront, there'll be posters or maybe tacked onto a telephone pole. Or if you're going through an office building, there'll be a bulletin board and there'll be ads everywhere. Or you're going up the stairwell and there'll be ads taped to the walls. Like, that's a common thing in academic buildings. You'll have tons and tons of advertising posted everywhere. And you walk by them all the time. You might be listening to a radio feed and you get an ad. It's just one of those things that you're just bombarded with advertising all the time, and they want your attention. And maybe you'll even get it in some ways you weren't thinking. You're watching a movie and there's somebody drinking a Coke. That's product placement. That's advertising. Maybe they're driving a Toyota. That's advertising. That's product placement. So you'll have that kind of thing just constantly bombarding you. And it's even in video games. Like when you play a video game, you don't have some generic billboard. Some companies pay good money to have a Pepsi billboard in that game. And it's one of those things that, again, you're playing that game, minding your own business, and here's an ad. So we get bombarded with ads all the time. Now, whether it's 4,000 or 10,000 or it's only 400, it's still a lot of things that you're going to get your way sent to you trying to get you to buy things. So that's one thing that we think about. Other thing, too, when you think about, when you dig into stuff like with Persuasion, we think about things like political elections because, every spring, every fall, just like flowers and barrels for construction on the roads, also pops up yard signs for elections. So in the primary election in the spring, general election in the fall, yard signs to get you to vote for somebody. Think about how many of those you pass by as you're driving down the road. I mean, try going 2 blocks and not passing one. And they're everywhere. If you're driving 5 miles, you're going to pass a ton of them. So you think about that kind of a thing. So when it comes to politics, here's some neat stats for you. In the 2010 general election, so this was a little while ago, 2010 general election, nearly $4 billion was spent during that general election. So the entire of all those offices in 2010, $4 billion. So then we moved to the general election in 2016. Now that was a presidential year, so there's going to be more money spent. Jumps from 4 to 6.6. And of that 6.6, 2.4 was spent on the presidential election alone. So that was the original Trump versus Clinton election. 2.4 billion was spent on just the presidential election. Move forward to 2020, and that's Trump and Biden. And it jumps to the overall general election was 14.4 billion. Remember, it's just 16.4, or 6.6 a couple years before, and now it's 14.4. Presidential election jumped from 2.4 to 5.7 billion spent on that question alone. And then in 2024, the general election jumped up to 15.9 billion with 5.5 on the general presidential election. So it went down some. But if you think about it, it's like the most expensive question in the world. Do you want this guy to be president, or in 2024, with Harris, this woman to be president? So this person or this person, which do you want? That's an expensive question, $5.5 billion. And the vast majority of that money is advertising. So everything from the yard signs to the commercials to the social media spots to the endorsements to all of the extra little things that happen at rallies, even the little pens that get handed out with their name on it, anything, buttons, does not matter. It's all that stuff is advertising. Now, For those people who are upset and think there's too much money in politics, I can understand that thought. I mean, 5.5 billion is a lot for one question. But for someone who teaches communication, who teaches students how to do communication, who do social media management and other video production and radio and all that good stuff, that's, my people. So I'm teaching them how to get out there and get that bread for those kind of things. That's a lot of money going in the hands of communication professionals just to ask that question. So when you think about how much money they burn through just for the sake of having that one question, who do you want, this person or this person, to run the country for the next 4 years? So, and maybe you're not big on politics. That's fair. Let's talk about something else that we talk about a lot, and that's sports. So you look at the idea of the Super Bowl. Now that's a lot of money getting spent there. This year was a record. So the average commercial spot was around $8 million. Now, that doesn't mean the commercial was $8 million. That means the 30 seconds of airtime from this point to this point, that 30 seconds of dead air got sold for $8 million. So basically, you go to the broadcasting company, whoever it is in that given year, whether it's Fox or ABC or NBC, whoever's carrying the Super Bowl that year, you go to them and say, I would like to have a commercial. And they say, well, we will sell you 30 seconds of blank airspace. And it's going to be $8 million. Some commercials went for 10. It depends, because just like with the old school magazines, where it opened with the centerfold, since magazines open there naturally, that adds typically some of the most expensive real estate. So just like with the Super Bowl, like right at kickoff, most people are watching it, and then right before halftime, a lot of people are watching those ads too. So those sell more than the ones at the end of the game when people pretty much tuned out or they're drunk and they don't remember it anyway. So, but on average, $8 million for 30 seconds. And then they have to make the commercial. They have to hire the videographers, the writers, all the people that do the work behind the scenes. They have to hire the talent. They have to do all the script writing and anything else that they're doing to edit it and put it all together and plunk it in. So you have all of that money getting dumped in. So when you think about $8 million, though, I mean, the one thing that makes that really stand out as a shocking amount is that comes down to $266,666 per second. $266,000, $266,000, $266,000. I mean, you're spending you're spending over $250,000 every second. I mean, that's mind-boggling to think about. But that's how much they're dying to get a hold of you, because the Super Bowl is the one thing that's super rare when it comes to commercials, because most times when you're watching a TV show, even football games, you're watching the game, you're watching your team play, and then when the commercial comes on, that's when everyone makes a break for the bathroom or turns to the person next to him and starts having a conversation. But when the game's on, quiet, the game's on. And then the commercial, then we talk. The Super Bowl flips that, because most likely your team didn't make it. You're just watching it for the sake of watching the game, and because you're having a party. So during the game, you might talk with the person. Then the commercials come on and everyone gets real quiet to see the commercials. And you have a captive audience of literal millions upon millions upon millions across the country, even sometimes around the globe, that are watching that spot. So you can see why it's worth that much money. So your regular everyday football game, the commercial might sell for this much. But because you have guaranteed millions upon millions, the commercial can sell for this much. And that's not a new concept. That's how newspaper ads are sold. In the old days when newspapers were king, if it's a little small town newspaper, the price for an ad is only this big because it's a small paper. It might have 8,000 people that read it. Whereas you get a large national newspaper that might have 20 million readers. Well, now you can sell tons of, ad space for lots and lots of money because, well, you've guaranteed millions of readers. So anyway, the whole point is that there's a lot of money that's spent to get you to care and to think about whatever they're selling. And that's the heart of advertising and persuasion. And the really interesting thing when you think about it is you get the idea of, what's so important about advertising is the idea of the critical thinking that you need to be able to withstand advertising. And again, like I said, sometimes you want to be sold. Like, I want a pizza, sell me. Who's got the best deal? Let's do this. But sometimes you just mind your own business and people are working, they're constantly working, especially if we take that number seriously, the 4,000 to 10,000 ads per day. people are continually working. It's a glut of advertising just trying to get you to maybe buy something. And, you're just minding your own business, driving down the interstate, and there's a billboard for McDonald's, and you're like, hey, I could go for McDonald's. And you're minding your own business, and then boom, it worked. So does it always work that way? No, of course not. Otherwise, McDonald's would be packed out because, the ad would affect everybody the same way. But sometimes you just you're just more susceptible to it. So critical thinking, of course, is very critical, when it comes to doing that. Now, whenever it comes time to doing the advertising and to get you kind of focused in on it and to be thinking about it, you need to be thinking about the idea of going back to the Greek, to the ethos, pathos, and logos. There's an ethical grounding that people have whenever they're trying to, do advertising work, when they're trying to persuade you on anything. So they have their own personal ethical grounding, or the company's ethical grounding. And then the pathos and logos remain. Now, pathos, of course, that's where the emotion comes in, the passions come from that side. And then logos is the logic, the reason. And then they just try to figure out, if they're trying to sell you, which way they want it to go. And that's an important part of it, because then how much do they lean on you personally wanting to buy something versus maybe, an 80-year-old woman or a 5-year-old child, which is why whenever you watch little kids watching TV shows, they want to buy everything that comes up on sale because it's pure. They don't have a lot of reasoning when you're 5. They're just all in the now, all in the emotion. So they watch you babysit a kid and put on TV programming, and every commercial break they're like, "Ooh, I want that. Ooh, I want that." They've got no reason why other than they want it. That's purely an emotional drive to it. But the point is that you're constantly being bombarded by these things, and you can't escape it. So when I was talking about in rhetoric, the idea of us like working through and discussing things and trying to negotiate and try to persuade the other person to do a thing that we want to do, it's no different when we move into advertisements, because that's the whole life of the ad man, the old school person trying to, behind the scenes, trying to come up with the great ideas to sell you. So when I was in graduate school, I worked at an ad agency downtown Pittsburgh, and the people there, it was their goal to come up with that catchy, that tagline, that jingle, those cool graphics, whatever it took to get you to buy things. And it's really interesting to see how that works, because again, every medium is different, every audience is different, and that's part of figuring out how persuasion works. I'm going to try to convince you of something, as we go back to the definition of persuasion. So I've got this stated opinion or belief. I'm trying to get you and convince you of it. Well, to whom am I speaking? So I know what I believe. What do you believe? What do I know of my audience? How do I think of my audience? How do I get them to consider things? So it's always interesting when you're watching a television show, you can understand who the audience is of that show is, because watch for what they're selling. So if it's a thing that's geared towards young teenage girls, you're going to see ad for makeup and feminine products and things like that. If it's geared towards elderly people, you're going to see ads for Buick and Depends and things like that, because they know who that target audience is. You're not going to advertise a commercial for like Mercedes-Benz's to like young girls, because they're not going to buy that. You need to be in a different income bracket and age bracket to be able to buy those things. So knowing your audience is a critical part of doing that. And it's really interesting to see and watch, how they kind of feel that out. But to be honest, it's not something that's just a shoot from the hip. It's very analytical behind the scenes to know what they call demographics and psychographics, to understand. Demographics are this visible, measurable things that you can easily see about someone, like their age bracket, their race, their sex, all those kind of things that you can easily pigeonhole people into. Psychographics are the ones that get into like their psyche, into their mind. So their religious beliefs, their political beliefs, their value systems, all those kind of things. And the ad person does a lot of research to figure out how I'm going to talk to my audience. So they figure out what my audience is, and they figure out what they believe, they figure out how they're made up, and then they work on that message for that audience. Again, if, as I mentioned in the rhetoric discussion, if you're going to go borrow money off a parent, you're going to have a different focused message talking to dad than you would to mom, because they're two different people and they approach things differently. and one uses a certain style and one uses another style. And so whenever you are sitting back and you're lazily flipping through your phone and an ad pops up, how are they trying to get your attention? Are they using colors, sound? What words are they using? What are they trying to do to get you to buy their thing? Then you hit that skip button or swipe and move to the next thing. And here comes another ad. What are they trying to do? Or you're watching a TV show and all of a sudden they're talking about a certain product. Like, that's interesting. Why did they start talking about that product? Be alert for those kind of things, and you'll start seeing them everywhere. Because again, if there are 4,000 to 10,000 per day coming at you, you're going to see them. I mean, the obvious ones, there's your billboard. Here's a pop-up ad. Those are obvious, but look for the little ones too. And it's kind of fun once you start looking for it. It's almost like a game. And then, the best part of the game is like, I see what you're trying to do there, how they're trying to get to you, because you know what your weaknesses are. And the ad person does too. So the person creating these ads they want to persuade you. So they're going to try to get to that little bitty button inside you and press it. So where you're like, ooh, I need that. They know what you like. They know what you want. They're going to try like crazy to find out, how many words or how many pictures or whatever what's it take, what colors, what image, what spokesperson is going to take to get you to be convinced to buy that product. So keep an eye out for that stuff. It's kind of fun. And it's also interesting, and then maybe you can apply that in your life to get other people to, jump on board your things as you're trying to persuade them. That's what I have for you today. Thank you very much for tuning into this episode. As always, please like, share, and subscribe. I greatly appreciate that. If you didn't like what you heard today, that's okay. Thank you for tuning in this long anyway. But I'll see you next time on Communicology.